This is the new TC Pride Podcast, Episode 39, Part 1 of Clarity to the Chaos, with special guest, Beth Zemsky. TC Pride Podcast, we are on location in Minneapolis with our special guest, Beth Zemsky. Beth, thanks for being here again.
I'm happy to be asked back.
So, of course, I say again because you were recently on the podcast right before the election. We had you on for a special episode that we did that I kind of loosely sort of framed as LGBTQ issues. And we talked a lot about how there are actually a lot of issues that people wouldn't necessarily think of as LGBTQ issues. We talked a lot about intersectionality and the need for solidarity and that kind of thing. And hopefully we can touch a little bit more on that today. But yeah, like I said, that interview wasn't too long ago. But
no, it wasn't. A different world, though.
Yeah, and kind of a lot has happened since then.
Yes, indeed, it has. Well, I think it goes without saying that the world's been more than a little different since Donald Trump was selected as president. And I say selected because I think it's important for us to remember he did not win a majority vote. He was selected by the Electoral College, and I think it is important for us to continue to remember that he's a minority president and not to get fooled by the idea that the majority of the American public is actually behind him. I think that's actually where I'd like to start, is remembering he's a minority president and increasingly represents more and more minority views.
So know that a lot of, to anyone that's even been paying attention, like at all, right? Like a lot of what's been going on, a lot that's happened has been the result of a lot of executive orders, right? Yeah.
So a lot of presidents do executive orders when they come into office to try to undo what the last president did or reinforce that. And his executive orders have been a mixed bag. There have been some that have been largely symbolic. Promises that he made to his small but very vocal base that really didn't have any deep policy changes, and some that had enormous policy ramifications, like the ban on people coming from 7 countries that are largely represented by Muslims. Huge consequences for people who are waiting to get visas, who had visas, who are now stuck. The news covered the folks who were stuck at airports, but that doesn't speak to the thousands of people who were waiting for status in other countries. And I just have to say, my grandparents were refugees. We often think about refugees now in a different way, but so many of our families were immigrants. And my grandparents were refugees. And had both my mother's parents had escape stories. And I think that when I think about my own family and what would have happened if they would have been all set to come and then turned around. And just as an aside, my grandfather was on his way to the United States and was told the quota was full for Jews that year and was sent to Argentina and 4 years to get back into the States. So unfortunately, this has happened before. And I think we need to be really, really vigilant and not make this somebody else's problem. This is a huge statement about who this country is and who we're going to become and what we're going to let this administration get away with.
So I've never been to New York, personally, never seen the Statue of Liberty, but last time I checked, if I remember correctly from a history book, it was something like, bring us to your poor, your tired, your huddled masses, that kind of thing, right?
The last line of that is yearning to be free.
Yeah, absolutely. So there, like you say, there have been a lot of issues surrounding, a lot of different marginalized communities right now. Specific to the LGBTQ community, you said there are a couple of these executive orders that have the potential to impact the LGBT movement greatly here in the near future, right?
Yeah, I actually would say every one of these executive orders has the possibility of impacting the LGBT community. We think about the wall in Mexico and what that's going to do for really vulnerable LGBT folks who are trying to get immigrant status, or the numbers of dreamers and other LGBT folks who are not documented and are really, really vulnerable because of that. And then the folks who are affected by this Muslim ban. So I think all of that is an LGBT issue. And then in addition to that, and I have to say, I think this is more than rumor. There yesterday, on email, Facebook, etc., there was significant information about a leaked White House document that is a draft of a new executive order that would expand the religious, what they're calling establishing a government-wide initiative to respect religious freedom, which in typical 1984 Orwellian doublespeak is actually restricting religious freedom and our rights. So what this would do is, and I'm quoting now from the draft language, it covers any organization, including those for-profit corporation, and protects religious freedom in every walk of life. So when providing services, education, healthcare, earning a living, seeking a job, employing others, receiving government grants or contract, it says that people who have a sincere religious objection to LGBT people or contraception or premarital sex or abortion or trans identity can refuse to serve, care for, or include or hire anybody whose lifestyle or choices or needs conflicted with their religious beliefs. And what the draft language specifically does, it protects the tax-exempt status of any organization, and this is a quote, that believes, speaks, or acts, or declines to act in accordance with the belief that marriage is or should be recognized the union as one man and one woman, and that sexual relations are properly reserved to such a marriage. And that they then, in this, define what male and female mean. They say male and female refer to individuals' immutable biological sex as determined by anatomy, physiological, or genetics at or before birth, and that life begins at conception. So there's so many dangerous parts of this. I mean, one of the dangerous parts is that they're trying to codify in law what gender means, which could really undermine any attempt to have transgender inclusion in civil rights laws. It also goes way beyond same-sex or same-gender marriage to basically say that premarital sex or sex outside of marriage, if somebody thinks you're having sex outside of marriage, that you could potentially be denied a job. And that women have no right to contraception if their employer believes that contraception is wrong, that they can get rid of contraception as part of somebody's health care coverage. So this is a very widely expansive idea of imposing a particular religious belief on our laws, and really further moves us from democracy to theocracy.
Yeah, that's one executive order. There were a lot of ands in there.
Yeah, it's a 4-page draft. It's published in The Nation yesterday. So on February 1st, it was published in The Nation if people want to go look at it. The rumor was it was going to be introduced today. It wasn't, but I think we all need to be watching out for it. Because this is what, this would be like a North Carolina bill on steroids.
So like we talked about in the last episode, last time you were on, you've been an activist for a long time, and for people that would like to get a little bit of background on sort of your background in the community and as an activist, I'd encourage folks to check out those episodes. Actually, episode 30 and 31 of the TC Pride podcast. But like I said, you've been around for a while. You've seen a lot, and there's definitely a lot going on in the world right now. Like you said, both here in the States and then throughout the world. So as someone who's been active in the movement for a long time, like I said, things are obviously bad right now. How bad would you say? And this might be kind of hard to gauge, but how bad would you say things are right now in comparison to how they've been at times in the past?
They're bad. I have a couple of things I want to say about that, Ryan. We have never seen a president like this. The way he is managing the office, which is incredibly chaotic and undermining faith in almost every institution we have, whether it's this idea that there's voter fraud, which undermines our faith in democracy, or that the media doesn't tell the truth, which underlines our faith in the media, or this idea that the education system is horrible, which undermines our belief in the education system. Over and over again, part of the message is don't trust anybody but me, which is a pretty fascist message. So I don't think we've ever seen something quite like this. And I mentioned before my grandparents being refugees and immigrants, and they were fleeing systematic anti-Semitism in Europe and fascism. the thing I most resonate with is, the hashtag that's been put out by Bend the Arc, which is a Jewish organization. Hashtag, we've seen this before. And I think we need to take that seriously, that there have been other times when this kind of fascism and white supremacy has surfaced, and we need to take this as not just another president. It's not just that Hillary Clinton lost the election. It's that there's something very fundamentally different going on that we just need to take very seriously. So having said that, I think there's a level of vigilance that we need to have around every single policy decision, every single power grab that this administration has, and counter it. And I'll say more about that, ways to counter that in a second. But I think we need to take this really seriously because this is different. Now, having said that, there certainly have been other times in history where our lives as LGBT people have been worse. There were times when we were hospitalized and given shock treatment for just assuming we were gay, or we were put in prison for any same-sex interaction. Or hundreds of thousands of us died, and President Reagan and the administration did nothing at the beginning of the HIV epidemic. So we faced hard times before as LGBT folks. And then as folks, other marginalized communities, folks of color, indigenous folks, bad stuff has happened in this country for generations. And there have been governments that have been oppressor in chief. You think about, just think about the Cherokee Nation that was marched out of the South and marched into Oklahoma. I mean, there have been, generations of oppressor in chief in the White House. Again, we can think about slavery. So I think we need context, right, to say bad stuff has happened in this country before. Is this the worst? I don't know. It depends what your perspective is and what you think about, and what historical moment you look at. And having said all of that, this is different, and we need to be vigilant and be conscious about that. So many in our community have long histories of knowing how to resist and survive and to organize when things are bad, and to really try to grab onto that collective wisdom we have, in our bodies, in our experience, that we know how to resist.
The TC Pride podcast has been a production of Podletter Media and Twin Cities Pride. Subscribe now on iTunes or Google Play and submit your first Pride story at myfirstpride.org.